All right, everyone. Welcome back. And I just realized that, I took this, originally set this up as a 14-week class, and we're kind of running out of time. So I'm going to try and pick up the pace a little bit and get through some of this stuff a little bit faster, just so that we can try and get through everything before the class is over. In the previous two sections, we went through turfgrass um, mowing equipment, and we did the IPM. And so I just wanted to do some additional overviews. We're going to break down the fertility a little bit more in the next section, but for now, I just wanted to go over some fertility practices, wanted to cover aeration and irrigation. So here we go. So aeration is a common practice, in lawn care. Basically, the reason that we're doing it is, to alleviate compaction, to alleviate anaerobic soils, increase air, the oxygenation of the soil, to create, in essence, artificial pore space for water and fertility to move through into the soil. We're also creating cavities in the soil for plants to actually colonize. Both the plant itself and the root systems to improve the overall health and vigor of the lawn. In essence, to help rejuvenate it, when it's kind of getting tired. But probably the main reason that we look at aeration is for alleviating compaction. So different kinds of tines that we use in aeration. One is solid tine, which basically, as the name implies, it's solid all the way through. And then there's also a hollow tine. If any of you have ever been around or seen aeration done, you might see little plugs or cores left all over. Those are actually done with a hollow tine. The solid tines are not going to do that. Typically, in a traditional lawn care setting, we're not going to run solid tines because they're actually going to increase compaction, laterally along each of the channels where the tine goes in. You're actually going to increase compaction in a native soil. Typically, we reserve the use of solid tines for sand-based systems, so we're not going to usually use these on a native soil situation, which is more than likely what you're going to be running into up here most of the time, unless you're in high-end sports turf or golf course maintenance. You're not really going to run into solid tine use too much. So there's a myriad of different ways it can be done. There's walk behind aerators, stand on aerators, ride on aerators, tow behind aerators that mount to tractors, mowers, ATVs, and they can come in either a cam-driven or drum style. The cam-driven units actually use basically a hydraulic or mechanical system to actually force the tines in and out of the ground. The drum style basically rolls along just like a tire or a wheel, and just uses the gravitational pull, the weight of the unit itself, to basically push the tines down to the ground. You can also, with the rotary style aeration units or drum style aeration units, especially if it's tow behind, they usually have a shelf on top where you can actually add ballast weight to increase that down pressure into the soil. So the cores themselves, basically, you can see here. So typically, with the hollow tines, you're going to pull about a 2 to 4 inch plug out of the ground. That's pretty common. You do have some larger units, larger pull behind or tri-mount type units that have the ability to maybe go a bit deeper than that. But for most equipment, you're typically only going to get into about the top 2 to 4 inches, depending on how wet the soil is. Um, so solid tines don't pull plugs, but are designed to penetrate much deeper into the soil to alleviate compaction and improve drainage, mainly used, again, like I said, on sand-based athletic fields. So sometimes you can get a layering in soils, and this helps to alleviate that and compaction in soils. We don't typically use these type of units in a traditional native soil turf situation. So why do we do it? Well, the main reason that we do it is that it alleviates compaction. Another reason that we do it is it improves water infiltration. Another reason that we do it is because it increases soil gas exchange. So again, we sometimes forget that roots do need oxygen. They don't have the ability to grow without it. That's why if you ever, do any digging or soil or not soil work, but gardening work or landscaping work where you're, planting or removing material, you might notice that the roots never really go much deeper than, maybe say a foot to 18 inches into the soil. Even on an 80 or 100-foot tall tree, the roots still don't typically go much deeper than, a foot to a foot and a half into the soil. And that's because there's just not enough oxygen in the soil once you get past a certain depth. So another reason that we do aeration is it creates openings for turf to grow into and rejuvenate, like I mentioned earlier. It reduces soil stratification. This is another thing when I was talking about the sand-based soil systems. You can get these different stratifications going on in the soil. There's something that can occur called black layer, which is another issue in sand-based soil systems. And the solid tines help to alleviate that. But we can also get this going on in a typical lawn or landscape setting as well, especially with poor urban soils. In construction sites or new builds, it's not uncommon to start getting some of this. You'd almost call like a fragipan or a hard layer, a crust that forms that basically becomes impenetrable for the roots and nutrients to move through. So, again, basically showing like in a sand-based system, you can actually see, where the aeration was done, and you can actually see how you can almost see the channeling here, where we can move that material around and actually take a soil that's more stratified, such as this one, and and get that mixing going on. You can also see the difference in the root growth and development with a core where the soil actually has been aerated. So, along the same lines of getting that organic matter, sometimes we can get that stratification of organic matter and thatch layer up at the top. So it helps to incorporate that organic matter deeper down into the profile. Like we see here, where you start getting that incorporation of this organic matter deeper down into the profile. But along the same lines, it's also going to help reduce thatch. So this can be a thatch management tool to help reduce thatch in the lawn. So solid tine units are usually used to go deeper in the soil profile. They alleviate hard pans and subsurface compaction. So this is going to be, things that are probably several inches down in the soil. They can be closer to the surface, but typically they're more in like that on athletic fields, especially where they're trying to alleviate flooding and pooling of water on the surface. And then along the same lines, kind of similar, more of a hybrid type approach, is something that called Irrigation. This is, a play on the solid tine setup, but what this actually does is it actually is designed to torque and fracture the soil. So this would be a Ventrac unit that they're using here, and a lot of guys really like using these actually for doing aeration overseeds and actually doing some lower budget lawn renovations. They do a really good, really good job of breaking up that soil and loosening and opening things up to get the seed in there. So I've seen really good results using these units on renovation projects. So now we're going to move into the overview of fertilization and chemical application. So I'm not going to get into the breakdown of the specifics. This is more of I guess, the nuts and bolts of practices surrounding fertilization and chemical applications. Why is it so jumpy there? Sorry about that. When we're talking about these applications, they're usually applied one of two ways. They're either going to be liquid or granular, or a combination of both. So most commercial applicators are using a combination of both methods to deliver the products. So types of equipment, usually at the base you're going to have some sort of a tank sprayer. So these can be a pull behind, they could be a skid mount, they could be something that goes in the back of a pickup truck. You're also going to have a hand can or a backpack sprayer. This is more or less for, what I call like QA work, or, where you're going out and doing like a service call or something like that. Maybe you've got to mix up a more expensive specialty product, or you're going out to do a job where maybe you're not going to need that much material, like in a perimeter pest spray or something like that. So, maybe you're just going to go around and you want to have some herbicide on your mow trailer, or you want to have your mow crews have the ability to go out and spot spray weeds in beds or lawns. So hand cans and backpack sprayers are real handy for that. As far as granular applications, there again is a myriad of different ways that we can do that, but they all kind of focus around the same thing. The basic would be the walk behind or powered rotary spreader. So your typical push spreader like a Lesco spreader or an Anderson's or Spiker spreader. Those would be three of the big ones that you'll commonly see in the commercial applicator world. And some companies will actually take this concept and as you can see down in the bottom corner there, create a motorized spreader. And so just a couple different options there. And so next up would be the ride-on spreader sprayers. This would be, kind of a combination of the two, and we were talking about combination of liquid and granular. These machines are really cool. They actually have the ability to do both. So it's a really handy thing. These pieces of equipment really have been a game changer when it comes to commercial fertilizer and chemical applications, because again you're cutting your application time down significantly. You can do significantly more square footage or acreage per fill, again cutting down on indirect time, and you have the ability to do both liquid and granular treatments simultaneously. So really handy tool, just an invaluable tool when it comes to the commercial lawn application business. So what kind of equipment makes sense? This is actually a commercial spreader unit. You can actually see it's actually a semi-truck. ATS actually does do this on golf courses. We've got special trucks with float tires that have the ability to actually go out on the turf and cause minimal compaction issue. And, we can do large area applications. So this is on an extreme scale for commercial application. You're not going to probably see this too often, but it illustrates a point that, you want to make sure that you're not oversizing your equipment for what you're doing. So typically when it comes to ride-on units like Z-Spray, Steel Greens, or similar type units, I wouldn't really worry about investing in one of those unless you're treating at least 2 to 3 million square feet per round, or that you're going to be that you're confident that you're going to be at that point in a short period of time, because it's a lot of money to lay out. Typically, they're in the $13,000 to $15,000 range, depending on how you get them set up. So it's a major investment, and if you don't have the square footage to compensate, it can take a while to recoup that investment cost. So another important aspect that I've hit on over and over and over again, I can't emphasize this enough, is the importance of soil testing. So, we really, really need to do a better job of adopting this as an industry. I don't know one farmer in the ag side that will do any application without running a soil test. I do not know any. They, I think farmers sometimes can get a bad rap, but I will tell you that agronomically, they will not do anything without a soil test. So it's very, very important to them. I mean, it's literally the first thing when you go to them. If they ask you any input, they're going to kind of expect that you're going to ask them about their soil test results. So it's something that ironically, we do in ag pretty extensively, but we don't, in lawn care. And the only reason I say that's ironic is because when you look at the overall expense per acre, the cost of inputs per acre, ag is going to be much, much lower. So they're still doing soil testing, and their cost of input is significantly less, than what you're going to see in a turf setting. So it's just ironic that you would think that the latter would be true, that that it would be more common for us to run soil tests in the turf side of things than it would be in ag, but that's just not the way it is. So another thing that we need to think about when we're doing applications is you want to use the right product for the problem, and you want to check that labeling on control and combination products, as well, because you want to make sure that you're, diagnose the problem correctly, and that you're using the right product for that problem, and that it's appropriate for that use area. We don't want to over fertilize. More isn't always better. You want to make sure that application equipment is properly calibrated. So, again, you can see here where you're getting surge growth. Actually, what's even worse is this, my guess is, was done by a homeowner with a drop spreader, which a drop spreader is going to be much, much more accurate and precise with delivery of fertilizer. Unfortunately, you've got to make sure that you are right on it when it comes to your pattern, or you're going to see something like this happen. And you can see where it was definitely over fertilized in those bands. So when it comes to applying a granular fertilizer, there's some things that we want to keep in mind as far as best practices. One that I would always recommend is go in and trim your edges, your bordering. You'll want to do your bordering first, and you'll do that with the deflector engaged. I always recommend doing that first because on the event, or in the event that you didn't, you may, let's just say that you go do your property and then you go in at some point later on and start edging the property or bordering the property. You might leave that deflector engaged, and then when you go to start the next job, you may forget to disengage it, and that could create a real problem with striping on a property. So generally, one little tip, like I said, is I always recommend to border or edge the property first, and then do your fill. And when you do your fill, you're basically going to fill your property and do your passes in straight lines back and forth, appropriately spaced. Typically, you're going to be about probably say 8 to 10 feet per pass, with these types of units. So just to give you an idea of what your patterning is going to look like, if you see the mow pattern in the background, it would almost be like every other mow pass if you can see the coloration based on how the turf's laying back there. So you're going to stop applying at obstacles like trees and around. You're going to basically come up to that obstacle and you're going to drive around it and then begin reapplying again. You don't want to play ring around the rosy when you're doing fertilizing. Again, that can cause over application of product in certain areas and just increases risk of damage to the turf. Generally speaking, when we're using a broadcast spreader, the reason that you see broadcast spreader usage more so than you do drop spreader usage is because broadcast spreaders are going to do more even distribution over a larger area. They're not as precise, they're not as accurate, but because of that, they're more forgiving. So you have a lot more flexibility. You don't have to make sure that your passes are necessarily spot on because you're more or less going to overlap your fertilizing when you do your return passes. You're going to have some overlap there. When when you look at this, you can actually see how this area here, when we're talking about 4 to 5 feet out on either side, that's basically going to be what we would call your effective spread width. So you're actually throwing material out much further than that, but your effective spread width is where you're going to concentrate your effort. And typically on like a ride-on spreader sprayer, you're going to want to match this effective spread width up with your spray boom. And so again, that's where probably I'd say 90 to 95% of your material is going to end up in that effective spread width. And a good, little trick is typically if you look at your wheel marks, if you try and set up your width based on your spray boom width, the way that the spray sprays out on either side of the spray boom, you're typically going to set it up so that fertilizer looks like it's more or less going from wheel mark to wheel mark. That's a typical, even on walk behind spreaders, I typically will tell people to go wheel mark to wheel mark. So that works out pretty well. When you're doing the spray though, you got to be, you got to take into consideration that you have that spray width. So you want to determine your spacing based on your effective spray width first, because that is very precise and accurate. And if you overlap, you can get burns. If you don't have enough overlap, you can get skips or misses in between. So you're going to set on a ride-on spreader sprayer unit, you're going to determine your effective spray width first, and then you're going to turn down the speed on your impeller to adjust that spread pattern so that it falls wheel mark to wheel mark more or less. And that should get you pretty good or get you pretty close to where you need to be. Again, we don't want to over apply because that's going to cause burn. So we definitely don't want to see that happening. And we also want to avoid applications in extreme weather conditions. So windy conditions, rainy, temperature extremes, and if you read the labeling, like I said, getting back to reading determining the right product and the right use area and everything. Additionally, you're going to see that many labels will have different environmental restrictions on them for where and how you can use them. And, they also, I'm seeing more and more wind and temperature guidelines. This is especially true with herbicides because you want to avoid drift as much as possible. Another tool that we want to look at, especially when it comes to spraying herbicides is you want to use some sort of adjuvant surfactant in there. Those are really going to help both with droplet size and droplet uniformity. They're also going to help that material to better spread and adhere to the leaf surface. Um, most of your um, most of your plants do have a thick waxy cuticle on the surface, and it's not uncommon for moisture and water droplets, so on and so forth, to kind of bead up and roll off. And if that droplet contains an herbicide or another compound, we don't necessarily want that beating up and rolling off the plant. Sometimes we want that material actually stick to the surface. And so these, again, when we're using adjuvants and surfactants, it's really, really going to improve the efficacy of the application and improve the results. And typically, there's really, the cost or the expense of using these products with your herbicides is negligible. So, as far as budgeting, I typically tell people to plan on budgeting about 20% material overage on granular because it's going to end up places that you don't want it to, like, what we would call off target sites, like mulch beds and paved areas. So, you also want to make sure when you're doing these applications that you're dressed appropriately and wearing the proper personal protective equipment. Some of you might look at this picture and think this might be overkill, but again, it depends on what you're using and how you're using it because I'm sure that all of you are familiar with the Roundup controversy in recent years, and the concerns about it causing lymphoma and other cancers. And it's not just Roundup. There's a lot of historical situations where we've seen problems with the use of herbicides, prolonged use, whether it's insecticides or herbicides. If you have enough exposure over a period of time, problems can happen. Not always, but it can. So another tip, or if you want to call it, it's the law, is that you need to blow off any and all solid surfaces when finished. This is the law. So your streets, sidewalks, driveways, patios, any sort of solid surface, it is the law to blow these areas off when you've completed your granular application. So another important thing that you want to take into consideration, especially if you're going to become a licensed applicator, is you're going to need the proper licensing and insurance. So basically, any time that you're going to be applying products to a property that is not your own, meaning your own personal house or your own personal property. Even if you're, say you work for, say Stan Hewitt, or you work for Oberlin College or something like that, that property doesn't belong to you. Also, you got to consider the fact that these are commercial or public properties, so you definitely are going to want to make sure that you're licensed. Basically the only time, like I said, that you're not going to be required to have some sort of licensing and insurance in place is if you're applying it to your own personal property, typically your home. Okay. So a homeowner, in essence, in the state of Ohio, a homeowner could actually walk into Advanced Turf Solutions or Site One and buy commercial products as long as they're not a restricted use pesticide, and they can actually use those personally for their own house. So, it's just anything outside of that, you're going to want to make sure that you are licensed and insured properly in order to do that work. So, this is a picture here that shows you what a typical applicator license looks like. And at the moment in the state of Ohio, you do not currently need a license to apply fertilizer commercially. Okay, so meaning for profit or on a property, again, other than your own personal use, you currently do not need a license to apply fertilizer commercially in the state of Ohio. That may change in the future. There are other states that have started to adopt this, that they are licensing or requiring people to get licensing even to apply fertilizer without pesticides. Again, this is a pesticide applicator's license. There are no pesticides in a straight fertilizer, but combination products like fertilizers with crabgrass preventers, fertilizers with insecticides, fertilizers with broadleaf weed control, those all contain pesticides. So those would actually be sanctioned under your commercial applicator's license. Straight fertilizer for the moment is not. So if you happen to work somewhere and all you're applying is a granular fertilizer, you do not need to currently be licensed for that. But again, that may change. We'll see what happens. They are requiring not licensing, but there are some certification training credits that they are requiring farmers to get for fertilizer. It's called a Category 15 in the state of Ohio, and that's an agricultural certification. It's not really a license. They're not licensed for it, but they are requiring farmers to basically get certified periodically in order to do fertilizer applications. So you do need a license if you're using any control product for commercial or for-profit reasons, including bed pre-emergence and weed control like Roundup. So you need to be a licensed applicator, which means that you're going to pass the ODA test, core, and whatever categories that you're seeking, certification in. So again, the general and the core isn't going to be enough. If you're doing, even if you're just a landscaper and you're applying, say, Snapshot, or you're applying Roundup in mulch beds, the Ohio Department of Ag actually could, and I've actually been with a client at one point years ago. I was on a property with a client, just stopped and saw him working and got out to talk to him. And unfortunately, while we were there talking, somebody from the Ohio Department of Ag actually pulled right up and started talking to him. Basically, one of the first things she asked is, do you have a license to apply? She said, I see it looks like you put something down in the beds. He's like, yeah, I did. And unfortunately, he didn't realize, neither did I really at that point, that yes, you do need a license for your people to be able to apply Roundup and other products, even in your bed. So again, if you're doing it for personal use, that doesn't matter. But if you're doing it either for commercial or for profit reasons as a service, you do need a license even for those things. So liability insurance, this is going to be a requirement for you to have an applicator license. It's not if you're an operator operating under somebody else's license, like a business license. But if you are the actual licensed applicator, you are going to need liability insurance. And there's only a few companies that offer it. I think Westfield was one of them. I don't know offhand. There may be a few more than what I recall, but I knew there were only a handful of companies that were offering liability insurance. I don't mean, and the reason I bring this up is if you are going into business for yourself or you're going to be working somewhere where you're doing applications, they may say, or you may talk to an agent and they're talking about liability insurance, but here's the catch. So, it's the devil's in the detail, right? So you can go just about anywhere and get commercial liability insurance. That's general liability. Okay, you need to have an additional rider on your insurance to cover you if you are specifically doing chemical applications. So this is not something that's quite as common, and you want to make sure if you're getting insured that they do, in fact, give you a rider on your policy specifically to cover the applications, because God forbid something happens and somebody either has an injury or there's some ill effect resulting from misapplication, and they come after you and they file a complaint with the ODA. One of the first things that the ODA is going to do is ask you about your insurance. You may even have to call your agent and talk about filing a claim with your insurance. And then all of a sudden, lo and behold, find out that you aren't properly insured. So it's something that you want to make sure that you have the rider that specifically addresses chemical applications on your insurance. So again, I said this a moment ago, you can be just an operator under a licensed applicator umbrella. Back in the day when I used to work in landscaping and sprayed trees and everything else, I have my operator's license. So you basically go through the same steps to get that as you would as an applicator. The difference is, number one, it's not the same cost. It's a little bit cheaper than getting the applicator license, but you also don't have all of those additional requirements. So, you know, the liability insurance and everything. That basically means whoever the applicator is that you're working under, you're going to gain that operator license on under their main license. So it's almost like a sub license under the license. So this doesn't allow you to be able to go out and do your own like moonlighting or whatever. So just because you have an operator's license, it doesn't mean that you're a licensed applicator. Again, and if you want to have an applicator license, typically it's going to be the individual. It's also going to be tied to the business. You're going to have some sort of liability insurance. So you're going to have some sort of LLC in place or something like that, and go through all the rigmarole. So, you know, again, an operator license is just that. It basically means that you're an operator for an individual or a company that already holds a main license in liability insurance. So again, it's going to be tied to the individual in the business. So usually, you know, if you have a landscaping company, you know, it's going to be in the name of that business. It's also going to be in the name of the individual who is the primary applicator for that business. You know, like with any licensing or public, or not public, but professional accreditation, you do need to get recertification credits every 3 years, or you're going to end up having to retest to renew that, or you know, it's going to expire, and that's for each individual category. So I always recommend to people, don't test for more categories than you need. You can always go down and take supplemental tests to get additional credits if you want to add or get additional categories on your license down the road. I just tell people to mainly focus on the big stuff to cover you, and then you can branch out from there. And, you know, keep in mind that some services like a perimeter pest treatment, at least at the moment, I believe perimeter pest sprays are still kind of covered under your ornamental license category. So it's kind of a neat little caveat. So you don't need to get an additional category to do perimeter pest sprays on somebody's house if you already have that ornamental category. You do, however, need a different category if you want to do, say, mosquito vectoring. And the only reason I say that is because you actually you can cover a fair amount of mosquito vectoring with your turf and with your perimeter or with your ornamental categories, just because the nature of the products that you're using and where you're applying them, typically like bifenthrin, for example, these are areas where you're going to be you know, already kind of covered under that umbrella. But if you're going to go out and you want to do like a Mosquito Joe franchise or something like that, or you want to actually go out and sell and do mosquito applications specifically, then you're definitely going to want to make sure you have that category. Go get Zoe. Go get Zoe. Go get Zoe. Go on. Do you want the phone? So, The state offers regularly scheduled seminars in different regions of the state throughout the year where you can get your credits and tests at the same time. You need to pay your money and pre-register for these tests first, and then you basically show up, you attend the seminar, and then you have the ability to get tests there on site. Or if you already have done your testing, you're obviously going to get your recertification credits for attending the seminars. So a lot of guys are going this route because it's kind of like a one and done. You pay the money and pretty much can get all the credits that you need to recertify, and then you're basically good for another 3 years. So fertilizing in general has traditionally been packaged and sold as treatments and apps. This could be changing a little bit, but for all intents and purposes, I would say 80 to 90% of your businesses out there still package and sell treatments or apps, okay? Basic applications usually consist of fertilizer and weed control, and then along with that weed control, you're going to have a pre-emergent for crabgrass. So that would typically, when you see pricing or you see programs, that's kind of the basic or standard program. The cost range is typically between $550 and $750 per 1,000 square feet for residential, and $110 to $130 per acre on commercial. I definitely would say that these are probably moving upward. They're at least going to be. I'm seeing more pricing around the upper end of the spectrum here in 2021 because labor costs are up. Material costs are up. There's a labor shortage. So as a result, because of the increased demand on services, I have seen upward pressure on price. It's not across the board, but I have definitely seen and heard of a lot of clients and a lot of customers out there raising pricing. So when I give you these benchmarks, this is not an excuse to not know your cost of doing business. Okay, these are just some general guideposts to kind of help you decide if when you're determining your pricing, if you fall within, call it a palatable range for the consumer based on what they're traditionally used to paying. You're going to want to create programs that keep clients' material costs at or below 25% of revenue. So usually that's what I'm doing. Whenever I'm designing a program for someone, I kind of go off of these parameters, and then I'm trying to limit the cost to 25% of revenue. So typically, like I said, I'm trying to keep those costs at 25% of the revenue, or 25% of the cost per 1,000 square feet or less. That's proven to be a little bit more challenging this year with the increase in material costs, but nonetheless, that's my goal with most of my clients. And really it just comes down to you knowing what your cost of doing business is. And there's always going to be someone that will do it for less. I run into this all the time. I have customers that come and I was here. And, at the end of the day, again, when we talk about knowing what your cost of doing business is, the better that you know what your cost of doing business is, and the more confident you are in knowing your cost of doing business, the less this is going to bother you, the less you're going to look like this gentleman in the picture, all right? There's always going to be someone that will do it for less. That doesn't mean that they're doing it correctly. It doesn't mean that that the customer is getting what they're paying for. And it also doesn't mean that they really know what their cost of doing business is, okay? So it doesn't really matter. Even with the big, huge national companies or regional companies that may be able to get in there and undercut, again, you're not gonna want to worry about that or fixate on that. It's good to know, okay, because if this is a consistent theme, then maybe you are overpriced. But a lot of times too, what happens is People that are price sensitive people will often seek out, say you're a new guy and you're just getting into business, they're going to seek you out thinking, oh, they're going to be cheaper because they're trying to build their business. And they might be shocked or surprised when you don't fit that mold in their mind that maybe you're not the cheap guy. But don't lose hope. It doesn't mean that you're necessarily out of line. Again, if you know what your cost of doing business is, then really this whole conversation becomes irrelevant. Boy, is this ever proving true in 2021 so far. Material, regulatory, overhead costs are always increasing, and you have to keep up on them so that you're not losing money. We're not running charities typically, so that this isn't for free. And I say this to people all the time. I say that even to clients of mine. I had a conversation with a guy the other day. He said, look, I can't be at the price that you're asking me to be at. I'm sorry. I don't know how, company X is able to, but I cannot do it for that price. I'm sorry. I'm not running a charity here. I feel bad. I don't want to walk away from the business, and it was a good client. However, I'm just not in a situation. Again, I know what my costs are, and I know what I can and cannot do, and so I'm not afraid to tell somebody when I can't do it. But one thing to keep in mind, especially in a year like 2021, is these costs have been all over the place. I mean, fertilizer prices have nearly doubled from a year ago. The other thing that's happened is labor costs have increased significantly. I'm hearing guys telling me that they're having to pay anywhere from around $18 to $21 an hour just to get people to show up for work. If they have existing employees, it means that they have to give those employees a bump in pay as well so that they don't walk. And even at the end of it, it's still not necessarily guaranteeing that these people are sticking around. So when it comes to material purchasing, you want to make sure that you're not over purchasing because, you might save a little bit on the front. I have guys that'll do this. They'll call me, well, how much if I buy it by the pallet? Or how much if I buy it by the truckload? Or, how about if I bought 8 drums of herbicide instead of 1? Or, am I going to get a price break? And it's like, well, yeah, you could, but how do you know that something is going to happen throughout the year where you're either not going to need as much material as you thought, or maybe, the weed pressure is different. And so now you spent all this money on a product, say product A, but now you need to go to product B. So now you have all this money tied up, in inventory, and you're going to have to pay tax on that inventory at the end of the year. So, not necessarily a great thing. So, I always try to persuade my clients to look for savings in other ways. Let's not focus or fixate on over purchasing or mass purchasing in order to try and save a couple bucks. I just feel like more often than not, people get burned on the back end trying to do that. The only times that it really does work well is, again, if it's a larger customer and they really, really have their programs dialed in and they're very accurate and they're very precise. And I have some truckload customers that are able to be within a few bags of where they anticipated product usage being, which to me is very impressive, and just a testament to good management if you can manage your inventory levels that tightly. Customers can opt to add in additional services. So this is another thing that I try to, for guys that are in this, trying to make a living on the application side of it, upsell. It's all in the upsell. And you want to consider offering them additional services like preventative grub control, surface insect control, fungicide treatments. I also mentioned like flea and tick, perimeter sprays, mosquito vectoring, things like that. So, I think that, you want to start by creating a simple system of good, better, best, for your client, and then, give them the option of layering additional things on and do some stuff a la carte, maybe, running different bundle and save promotions, things like that. So, just keep that in mind that generally speaking, I recommend guys the good, better, best approach when it comes to creating a program or a proposal for a client. Pricing is typically done on a per thousand square foot basis. This is referred to in terms of M's or K's, depending on the region of the country you're in. We tend to say M's around here. M would be the Roman numeral for thousand. So, you tend to hear M's thrown around a lot over here. When you go to the East Coast, mid-Atlantic area, you might hear K's thrown around a little bit more. Either way, it kind of means the same thing. So don't get caught up on that. It's basically the same thing. We're talking about how many thousand square feet of property. So when we're doing these prices, again, when I talked to you about those ranges a few slides ago, 550 to 750 per thousand square feet. So when we create programs or we create proposals for clients, just keep that in mind. If you're dealing with bigger properties, commercial, institutional type properties, you're going to price things out per acre. So a little bit of difference there. When we're talking about residential or smaller properties, say an acre or less, we're typically going to price it out per thousand square feet. If you're an acre or more, you're probably going to price it out on a per acre basis. Earlier ago, I talked about how we've traditionally always looked at pricing and selling things as treatments or steps or rounds of fertilizer or applications. And that means if you're a 4 or 5 amper, 6 amper, 7 amper, whatever, you're going to bill the customer that number of times for each application, and you're going to price it out per app. Okay. So one thing that I've suggested for years to people, and there's definitely a growing shift in this, is treating lawn service as a subscription service with monthly billing, basically like your cable bill or your cell phone bill or your Netflix bill. So basically, it'd be a recurring thing where you auto pay. Maybe they give you a credit card. You keep that credit card on file. You run the card before you even show up to do work. It's done monthly. It creates continual cash flow revenue 12 months a year. You have auto annual renew. So, you don't have to send out all these waste time and money, sending out all these renewal letters that you probably only get, a half or less of those people to come back. I mean, you can build all of that in. There's ways that you want to go about doing it. You want to make sure that, you have all your liability terms and conditions spelled out there when they click that I agree button to make sure that you're covered so somebody can't come back and sue you, or the state can't come in and say, oh, well, you're not following, e-commerce rules, laws, whatever. So you definitely want to make sure that you're in compliance if you're looking at this, but nonetheless, this is a great thing, and I'm definitely starting to see a trend moving in this direction of the subscription economy. And this graph here, actually, this is an overall market share index showing the subscription economy index level. And it just shows you how much over the last, 5 or so years, how much the subscription economy has increased. Okay. It's cheap, it's easy, it's consistent. It's, people, I think people are more apt. I think they're going to be more apt to giving you a credit card and having it billed monthly. It's going to be a more palatable price. So instead of trying to sell them on how many apps or total season package cost, you just say it's going to be $30 or $40 a month. And, it also, in my opinion, makes the upsells easier. You could say for an additional $5 a month, we could do this, or for an additional $10 a month, we could provide you with these services. So I think it also, going to a subscription-based economy, would actually make it easier for you to bundle and sell them additional services. I also think that it's going to be a lot easier, especially with all the rising costs with labor and material and regulatory hangups, that it's easier to pass on a price increase on a subscription based setup than per application charge, because typically whenever you talk about raising something, let's just say a $50 an app line, you're going to take it up 10%. That's $5 an app. Over a 5 or 6 app program, that's 20 or 25 or $30 a year more for that client. And you wouldn't believe how many people will just balk at the fact that you tried to raise their price $25 to $30 a year, $5 an app. But what if instead of trying to do that per app or per year, what if you broke it down to the smallest increment? You just, you're going to pass on a $2 a month increase or $1.50 a month increase over the course of a year. You're basically accomplishing the same thing. And again, with a subscription type setup, you're going to automatically build these in. So it's already going to be in there, and they're already going to be paying for it. Another strategy I've seen people doing too is if they agree to prepay the year in entirety up front, you could give them the option to forego whatever that annual increase would be if they want to just lump sum pay at the beginning of the year. So, some cool things. It's just something to throw out there. If any of you want to know about it more, definitely reach out to me and we could talk about it a little bit, but just something to be aware of out there. The prepaids each month with a credit card or another service, whether it's Zelle or PayPal or something like that. These are really great, for the commercial professional that's out there every day trying to make money, because it means that you don't end up having to chase down money, and you may actually be able to pre-approve or pre-authorize that charge on the credit card. Basically make sure the credit card goes through before you even step foot on that property. So this is really great because, again, it's going to minimize the amount of bad debt that you have, and collections and receivables, which is always a huge problem in the commercial landscape business. So, again, even at a minimum, like if you don't want to go the full bore in with a subscription based setup, even just offering people auto pay discount or something like that, or like I said, maybe if they prepay the entire year up front on a credit card or using another service like PayPal, you'll give them a discount, or you won't pass on a price increase. So, just some things to keep in mind when it comes to that. If you're going to go into the service, side of this, commercial service side of this. So now we're going to move into irrigation practices. And again, I'm trying to fly through this for the sake of time. So if you guys have any questions as we move through all of this, I know it's kind of hard and heavy right now, but if you do have any questions, please reach out to me. And I'd be more than happy to spend some more time going into it. So, rule number one when it comes to irrigation, I tell people this over and over again: irrigation is not a replacement for Mother Nature. Okay, so this is not going to, when we have a drought in summertime, an irrigation system is not going to replace the volume of water that you're going to get out of one afternoon downpour, okay? So turfgrass typically requires at least an inch of rainfall per week to prevent dormancy and drought stress. And 1 inch of rainfall, just to give you perspective, 1 inch of rainfall over 10,000 square foot lawn, which is a typical suburban lawn, is about 833 cubic feet or 6,219 gallons of water. So, if you think about it in terms of a swimming pool, I would say that most swimming pools are probably at the small end between 5,000 gallons and at the higher end, maybe 15,000 gallons. So, just to give you an idea, you're almost talking about a half or a whole swimming pool of water when you have one of these, summertime downpours where you get an inch of rain. So if a standard system, a standard water system in a home or a business if a standard system could supply 15 gallons per minute, it would take 6.9 hours to meet that need. So keep that in mind. So, the key here is running each zone 15 minutes going to accomplish this? Clearly not. So we're not going to come anywhere near replacing nature in this situation. We're in essence going to have to run that system quite a few hours, a good chunk of the day, on each individual zone. Keep in mind, not just the whole system, but each zone we're going to have to run for hours and hours and hours and hours in order to deliver the same amount of water. Okay. And don't forget that you need to overcome environmental loss like runoff and evaporation. I'm sure if you drive by, you see your irrigation system on, you've seen water, running away in the gutter on the street or all over the sidewalks, driveways, things like that. So we do have to be mindful that not all of the water that is going through there. So even if you wanted to set it up to where you were running it 7 hours per zone and you could get 15 gallons per minute, all that, you still have to do even beyond that because you have to compensate for environmental loss. So a healthy lawn typically uses 0.2 of an inch of water per day under normal conditions. This could actually increase to 0.5 an inch per day under hot, dry, or windy conditions. So why do we irrigate? I guess you might look at this and say, what's the point? Why would I even worry about irrigating? Well, for one, the reason that we do it is it reduces stress. So we can cool the canopy. If we're getting into a, really hot, dry period, we're going to effectively reduce stress on that turf. You're going to cool the soil in the root zone. Cool season grasses typically begin dying when temperatures are consistently at or above 90 degrees. So the goal is that we're going to fill the gap between the actual weekly rainfall and 1 inch. Okay, that's really what we're trying to accomplish with an irrigation system. The other thing that you have to keep in mind with irrigation is soil nutrient availability. How do plants get their nutrients, right? They drink them. So how is the plant going to get any benefit out of any fertilizer that you just put down if we don't get any rain? It's not. So in order for the plant to benefit from a fertilizer application, you have to first solubilize those nutrients, and then they have to actually get into the soil solution, and then the plant will actually start taking them up as it's taking water or soil solution out of the soil. And keep in mind too that turf, just as a rule of thumb, turf is 95% water. So when you look at all the cellular structures and everything in a grass plant, 95% of everything in this cell is filled with water. So it's really how are you going to have a plant survive without water? It can't. So turf will die if it receives no water for 4 to 6 weeks. So if we had a really hot, dry summer this year and we went 4 to 6 weeks without water, and let's just say because we had a drought or whatever, so let's just say they put in water restrictions and they said that you can't irrigate lawns or something like that. If we went on like that for about 4 to 6 weeks, you would actually kill turf. Okay. Another reason that we like to keep things irrigated is because it reduces and prevents compaction. So when you have pore space in soil, what fills that pore space? You're filling it with water and you're filling it with air. So what fills that void when the water leaves? And the answer really is nothing. What ends up happening is as the plant or the environment's sucking and wicking that moisture out of that pore space, it literally creates a vacuum, right? You don't get enough air infiltration to replace what's being taken out. Okay, so what ends up happening is you get this vacuum effect where it actually starts to close and compact the pore space in soil. So what are some ways that we can minimize irrigation demands? Well, For starters, we could look at chemistry to come to our aid, in the way of wetting agents and soil penetrants. These are water moving and water holding technologies. We've brushed on them a little bit. Excuse me here. We've brushed on them a little bit earlier, but basically these are technologies that are going to help either move that water into the soil profile to prevent surface loss, runoff and surface loss, and also to hold it in the soil to prevent it from leaching away. Another strategy that we can use that doesn't have to do with the irrigation itself, but will help us is the use of TWACA and other, TWACA approved and otherwise drought tolerant, heat tolerant varieties. We talked about this in the selection, turfgrass selection portion that, for installation and so forth, that, if we could start to move more in the direction of these TWACA approved varieties, this is really going to cut down, typically the goal with these is, that you're going to reduce that water demand 40 to 60%. So when you see this certification, it's a good sign. If you don't see it, ask your seed provider if they can find out for you if these are TWACA approved. And keep in mind that a lot of blends aren't necessarily going to say this because maybe not all of the varieties that are in that bag are TWACA approved, but there may be a TWACA variety in that mix of 3 or 4 varieties of grass in there. So keep that in mind. Just because it doesn't say TWACA on the bag doesn't mean that there isn't a TWACA approved seed in there, and you want to check on that. Another strategy that you can use, again, not having to do with irrigation at all, is raising the height of cut. A lawn mowed at 3 inches is going to look a lot better and fare a lot better than a lawn mowed at 1.5 inches. That's going to create much more stress keeping that lawn mowed at a shorter height of cut. Another thing that we can look at is how to irrigate properly, okay? So general rule of thumb is that we want to water deeply and infrequently. Ideally, there should be standing water on the lawn in each zone when the cycle completes. So you're going to water to the point of runoff, basically. Keep in mind that different soils are going to infiltrate at different rates. So just because you have runoff doesn't mean that you've applied anywhere near enough water. It's just you're going to irrigate to the point of runoff, and then you're going to allow that to saturate the soil and soak in. Once it's done so, you can resume irrigation again. Okay. The goal here is to maintain hydration in the top 8 to 10 inches of soil. If you can hydrate 12 inches, that's even better. And again, this is where soil penetrants can help you with hydrophobic and dry soils to help that water move down into that profile. Okay. Watering for 10 to 15 minutes per zone daily keeps that water near the surface. So you're going to create a couple of problems here. Number one, do you think you're going to be getting that 8 to 10 inch or 12 inch depth properly hydrated? No, you're not. And the other problem that's going to happen is that if you keep watering at the surface or superficially, you're going to promote the roots, the grass to root at the surface instead of rooting deeply. And this is going to contribute to thatch buildup. It's also going to contribute to poorly rooted turf. It's basically superficially rooted, so it could pull up really easily. It could be damaged by insects really easily. And at the end of the day, if it's not driving those roots deeper down into the profile, if you're not making it work for that water, it's just not going to fare well when we go into periods of hot, dry weather. Okay? Turf will show signs of drought stress as soon as it's no longer watered. So it's kind of an interesting thing, but you can start seeing this set in really quick, especially in the height of summer. As soon as you start drying that soil profile out, you're going to start seeing signs of it. And a couple of things that you'll see is this discoloration, the purpling or the smoky appearance on the turf can be a dead end giveaway, especially when you see it mottled, either mottled with darker areas or mottled with brighter green areas, kind of like the lawn in this picture. That's pretty common when we see the first signs of drought stress setting in on a lawn. The other indicator, if you're actually on the turf, is when it's not resilient. So when it doesn't stand back up after you mow it, after you walk on it. When you see things like this, where you have footprints left in the grass and it's just collapsed and it doesn't stand back up on its own, that's again another sign of drought stress. So the reason that we don't want to constantly water. The reason that, one of the reasons that we want to do it deeply and infrequently is not only so we can drive those roots deeper into the soil profile and so we can hydrate that top foot or so of soil adequately, but we don't want to create a situation where we have constant moisture at the surface, because moisture increases disease and insect risk. So, that doing that 15 minutes a zone, 2 or 3 times a day, 7 days a week, you're going to invite a host of problems to come in. And again, another thing that I hit on too, and we were talking about watering to the point of runoff. Okay, soil texture is going to affect water demand. So, the larger the pore space, if you're dealing with more of a sandy type soil versus a clay soil, the larger the pore space, the faster and the deeper that water is going to travel. Okay, on clay soil, it's going to take it much longer for that water to move into that profile. A good rule of thumb, if you don't want to have hydrometers and get into a bunch of crazy stuff trying to figure out, is the finger test. I do this at home. I do it with house plants all the time. If you stick your finger into the soil and the soil feels damp to the touch, it has moisture, that's a pretty good indicator that stuff doesn't need to be watered. So it could be hot and dry, but if you check that soil, especially in the top couple inches or so, and it still feels damp, then you're okay. If it doesn't, then you may want to consider watering. And the biggest challenge, again, is infiltration and avoiding runoff, because basically all this water that's running off these paved areas and into the street is doing us no good. So, we want to make sure that when we're watering, again, we're taking into consideration different soils have different infiltrations. We want to water to the point of runoff, allow that water to soak in before we resume watering again. Okay. You want to cycle your zones with breaks in between the cycles so that the hydration goal is met. Again, allowing that water to penetrate into the soil profile and then coming back again. We're going to cycle these areas. We're not going to just run a zone for 3 hours straight and then literally have all that water running off the surface. That's not a good thing. We're going to run it as long as we can. Maybe it's 30 minutes, maybe it's 60 minutes, and then we're going to give it a break to allow that water to soak in. Then we're going to resume again, maybe a few hours later if we can. So, again, we want to consider using penetrants if we have poor infiltration. If it's not easy to get that water to move in, if we can't run zones very frequently, or if we can't run the zones long enough to get the adequate moisture in before it starts running off onto the driveways and sidewalks, this would be a good time to maybe consider using that penetrant to help increase that water flow into the soil. So keep in mind that it takes 3 times as much water to recharge clay soils to a 12-inch depth as sandy soil. So this chart is a breakdown. It gives you water holding capacity of different soil types. So when you did your jar tests in the one experiment, you got to determine your soil, soil texture. This is where that comes in handy, because if you know what your soil texture is, you can use it to determine things like what is the water holding capacity, inches per foot of that soil, and how much water am I going to need to put down, per foot of soil, to meet the hydration requirements of that soil. All right. And heavy silty or clay loam soils like the ones in most of Northeast Ohio hold the most water. So they're going to hold the equivalent of 2 inches of water per inch of depth. That's a lot of water, okay? Which means that when when you do this, when you have adequate moisture in the soil, it means that that soil can provide water for a long, long time. Keep in mind what we talked about earlier, where the grass is going to use between 2/10 of an inch and half an inch per day typically. So, knowing that, and if you know that the roots are going down 6 or 8 or 10 inches, and you know that I have 2 inches of water per inch of soil, effectively, how long can that soil supply that turf what that turf needs, if it's adequately charged? Equally, though, keep in mind that if we deplete the amount of available water in the soil, that we are going to have to recharge that. So once we start depleting that, it is going to, on the reverse, take the equivalent of 2 inches of water per inch of depth to recharge that soil. So just keep that in mind. There are areas throughout Northeast Ohio that have lighter sandy soils that again are only going to provide half that. So wherever we have lake ridges or other different little soil anomalies around the area, they're not going to be able to provide anywhere near what our clay loam soils are going to be able to provide. The flip side of that, though, is that they are a lot easier to recharge. Usually, water infiltration is much better on them, and they recharge a lot faster and a lot easier. So, they're a little bit easier to manage with that regard. Again, this is a slide that kind of talks about this. It just shows you, this is a time lapse, basically showing the infiltration rate. So when you look at like your silty clays or clay soils, they're going to be down here toward the bottom. So very, very low infiltration rate. This is done metrically in terms of centimeters per hour. And then this shows you the amount of time that's elapsed, in the study. So, sandy soils, again, are going to be much faster infiltration rates than clay soils. So clay soils, again, very low infiltration rate, 1/10 of an inch to 1/4 of an inch per hour compared to sand. And the amount of water matters, okay, but how you water also matters. So irrigation is kind of an all or nothing proposition. You either want to do it 100%, or you just might be better off letting it go dormant. You don't want to allow that soil to completely dry out in the first place. So, you may have to actually begin watering sooner than you would think. Here we are in the first part of April in 2021. Actually, for the past week was unusually warm and dry. And the ground was actually very, very dry. Some of my clients were actually talking about, man, I'm starting to think I'm going to need to turn that irrigation system on a lot earlier. And I said, you're correct, because even though we are early in the spring, it does not mean that we can't start seeing drought signs and symptoms, especially with the grass just breaking dormancy and starting to grow again. It is susceptible to drought stress even early in the season. There's a lot of times where May could be particularly cool in Northeast Ohio, but in spite of that, could be unusually dry as well. And again, you think everything's okay, and well, it's not really that hot out, and it's not summertime, and I don't need irrigation on, but little do you know you're causing a significant amount of stress on that grass. So you're still going to need at least a half an inch of precipitation or irrigation every 1 to 2 weeks to keep that crown alive. So even if your strategy is screw it, I'm just going to let the grass go dormant, keep in mind, if we went into a prolonged drought, you're still going to need to provide that grass some form of precipitation or irrigation every 1 to 2 weeks to keep it alive. Okay, this is not going to bring it out of dormancy. It's not going to make it green up, but it won't die. And even dew works. Sometimes we forget about dew. When you go out in the morning, like this morning, there was a fair amount of heavy dew on the grass. That dew can actually contribute a significant amount of moisture to the system. So don't forget about that. Even though it can be dry, sometimes you don't necessarily see drought stress because when those temperatures get cool enough at night over the summertime, you start getting that heavy dew on those lawns. That is providing the turf with a form of moisture. So again, drought stress. This is just kind of showing you. It's kind of a cool little time lapsed deal here, showing you that you know, April, each year you can see that we see signs of drought stress. And again, I just told you that we kind of came out of a period of drought here in 2021. In the first, end of March, beginning of April, it was unusually dry. And so it does not have to be hot and sunny for there to be drought stress. So it is very possible to see signs of drought stress even in April or May, in the springtime when we wouldn't normally think about it. Usually I think we get this idea in our head that drought's something that happens in the hot, dry, dog days of summer. And I just want to make sure that you're aware this isn't necessarily the case. We could get drought feasibly at any time of the year, and it actually is not uncommon to see drought periods in the spring in Ohio. So again, if you're leaving wheel marks and footprints and the turf doesn't stand back up, that's a pretty good indicator of drought stress. You could see this dark, smoky appearance, deepening or of color, or a grayer color to the lawn. Again, I call it like a smoky appearance to the grass. It's usually a pretty good indicator that it's stressed. The turf browns and wheel marks in higher traffic areas from cell wall breakage. So, this is actual damage from just going out and mowing the grass, and just the process of the wheels riding over that is enough to cause damage to drought stressed turf. So otherwise, you may come onto an area and you'll see large nondescript areas of generally brown turf with no evidence of insect or disease. That's a pretty good indicator. So when we get out there and we look, one of the questions I often ask, especially on new seed jobs and stuff, is, was the client really watering like they were supposed to? So we could figure this out using a soil probe or a knife test, stabbing it into the ground. How easy does it grow in? Pull that soil profile out, check it, do the finger test on it, stick your finger in the hole in the soil. Does it feel damp? It's kind of cool that, we have the ability to perceive dampness when we touch it. It's a really good indicator. So again, is that homeowner or client watering the way that they're supposed to? Again, the finger test, a really, really good, indicator. If nothing else, use the finger test. So sustainable irrigation best practices. Well, for starters, know your soil type, just like we did with that jar test. Know your soil type to best determine the watering requirements and frequency. You want to employ deficit irrigation. So the turf can tolerate, we talked about, how much does grass use and how much does an average 1-inch downpour require, per given square footage of turf, all these kind of things. What is the water holding capacity of a soil based on texture? But, here's a thing that we want to talk about too. Is, we can employ deficit irrigation. So deficit irrigation, the premise is that you're only going to supply the turf with about 60 to 70% of their evapotranspiration rate with little visual impact. So, that's kind of a cool thing. So in essence, what it's saying is that we would, when we have that ideal amount of water, say it's 1 inch per week, we could probably get away with only supplying 60 to 70% of that, and have minimal visual impact on the turf. So another management strategy would be not to irrigate until the grass shows the first signs of drought stress. So this would be called wilt-based watering. This does a couple of things. It'll promote the deeper roots to take advantage of soil moisture reserves. By doing this, you're also not allowing the grass to cross a critical threshold, like a permanent wilting point or something like that. But you're also pushing that grass enough and hardening that grass off enough that it has the ability to withstand and hold up to periodic dry spells before you have to resort to irrigating. Another best practice is watering in the morning just before daybreak. Takes advantage of low temperatures and low evapotranspiration. Once that sun starts coming up over the horizon, you're going to start losing water to evapotranspiration and evaporation. We don't want that, okay? The other benefit of watering in the morning is it's going to wash guttation fluid off the turf. So guttation fluid is when you get a buildup of hydrostatic pressure in the plant, it actually has little openings that it can exude water out. But that water isn't just water; it has other, amino acids and sugars and so on and so forth in it that serve as a food source for insects and bacteria. So, kind of a cool thing. Like I said, the hydro or the guttation fluid comes out of a pore on a plant called a hydrothode. Another area where you might have experienced this and maybe didn't know it is maybe if you were standing underneath a tree in the, say a nice day, you might have been outside standing under a tree. And, while you were standing under it, maybe you felt a drop of something on you, but you looked up and the sky is clear blue and you didn't see any evidence of rain or anything like that, but something fell out of you from the tree. It's possible that could actually be guttation fluid that is coming out of the tree higher up in the canopy. So all plants have this. They do it, to prevent that hydraulic pressure from building up too high and causing damage to the cells in the plant. So don't water overnight. This is another best practice. Do not water overnight. This will promote disease. I almost guarantee if you water at night, you will end up with disease, especially Pythium in hotter weather. So, keep that in mind. Maintain mowing height above 3 inches. If you're above 3 inches, this grass is going to do a much better job. You're going to shade the canopy, you're going to shade the crown, you're going to shade the soil interface. So you're going to have less environmental loss, and this is going to reduce stress on the turf overall. Just like in this picture, and again here, you're going to want to maintain sharp blades. Mowing with dull blades frays the turf. This causes 30 to 50% more water loss on turf. So this lawn is actually going to lose 30 to 50% more water, than a lawn that's mowed with a nice sharp blade and has a nice clean cut, like in this picture on the right. Don't over fertilize. So if over fertilizing is going to increase growth, that's going to increase water consumption and thatch buildup, as well as lush tender growth that's more likely to wilt during drought stress. So again, we're trying to push the plant enough, create enough stress that it strengthens that plant and hardens it off, but we don't want to, baby it too much to where now it's got all this lush, succulent growth and has no ability to go into the hot, dry periods over summer at all. Maintain thatch. Thatch ties up water and nutrients, and the turf is more prone to root into the thatch than the soil because it's easier, and it's going to go the path of least resistance. So, in essence, it's lazy, and unless it has to, it's going to root into the thatch versus rooting into the soil. So typically we want to keep the thatch at levels of a half an inch or less. We can do that by aerating, verticutting, dethatching. So these are different ways that we can manage that thatch. Use soil conditioners and amendments and aeration to reduce compaction and increase water infiltration. We talked about this earlier. You want to use drought-tolerant turfgrass varieties when overseeding or installing new lawns. Another good rule of thumb, don't irrigate when it's raining. There you go. I'm sure you guys have seen this at some point. But that's going to wrap it up here. So this should create, getting tongue-tied here. This should complete all of the stuff that I had in Module 8. And again, if you have any questions or want me to elaborate on any of this stuff any further, don't hesitate to reach out to me. All right, thanks, and I'll see you guys in the next one.